Kia ora, talofa, malolele and bulavanaka. Welcome to this screencast on Alexander Becomes King. So as you can see, we are breaking down a few chapters. We've got the rift between Philip and Alexander, the murder of Philip, Alexander, king of Macedon, the revolts in the north, and Thebes, which we call a terrible warning, and finally planning an invasion. Okay, so let's go with our first one, the rift between Philip and Alexander. Now, it's really important to understand the Alexander topic is to have a good understanding of the relationship between his father and himself, his father Philip and Alexander. Now, at this time that we're up to, Philip took a seventh wife, which is a lot, I guess, one for each day of the week. Why Aaron would want 7 wives, I don't know, but well, no, I don't know. Anyway, Philip took a 7th wife. Now, this was not unusual in Macedonia. Polygamy, having many wives, was fairly common in Macedonia. It certainly was not in the rest of Greece, which is important, I think, because the rest of the Greeks, as you know, looked down upon the Macedonians. They saw them as barbarians, uncivilized. And this is one more piece of evidence that the rest of the Greeks, particularly Athens, would have provided. Look, the Macedonians practice polygamy. However, Philip is on to wife number 7. Now, it's not unusual that he marries again because, as we know, if we look back over Philip's marriages, they have all, as far as we can tell, really been political marriages, where he's used himself to marry different people in different royal families situated around Macedonia that will create alliances and will keep Macedonia safe. The sources do tend to suggest that perhaps the one exception to that is Philip's marriage to Olympias, that he did fall in love, or at least with lust, with her, the mother of Alexander. But for most of the fact is that Philip's marriages were political and part of his campaign of keeping Macedonia safe. However, he is going to take this 7th wife, and by all accounts, he was absolutely smitten with her. She was considerably younger, possibly in her late teens, when Philip was in his early to mid 40s. And for good or for bad, there is no lack of evidence of a man in their 40s falling head over heels for a younger woman, particularly if his wives are getting a bit tiresome. We know there's the rift between himself and Olympias, and perhaps he's had enough of her and her nagging, and he's fallen in love with this younger, beautiful, more vivacious woman. And the rift with Olympias, I think, would have gone quite some way to propelling Philip to end up in the arms of a younger girl. Now, the woman that he marries, her name is Cleopatra, or actually Philip gave her this name on their wedding day. It's perhaps an unusual custom in Macedonia at this time, was that the wife is such the property of the husband that bestowing a name on the wife was seen as par for the course. Her actual name was Eurydice, but Cleopatra was the name that Philip gave to her, apparently in honor of his mother, which is, I don't know what you think about that. But that's her name anyway, so she's known in history as Cleopatra. And what's important is that she is Macedonian, and she is full Macedonian. Now, this is crucial for Alexander because Alexander's mother, Olympias, is not Macedonian at all. She's from Epirus. So Alexander the Great hero of Macedonia, he's only half Macedonian. So this creates potential issue for Alexander succeeding Philip when Philip was to die. If Alexander take the throne, well, hang on a minute. There is a potential issue. If Cleopatra and Philip have a son, then that son would be full Macedonian and maybe a rival to Alexander's claim to the throne. Now, that's looking at it, I guess, a bit objectively, and no doubt this was on Alexander's mind. However, Alexander is the favoured successor, and Alexander is successful in his own right, as we know, and he's champing at the bit to be as great or even greater than his father. And there's no guarantee that Philip and the new bride will have a child. childbirth at this time, and for most of human history, was very, very difficult and very, very dangerous for the child and the mother. And further, there's no guarantee that the child would be a boy. And further to that, Philip would likely be dead before the boy comes of age, if a boy does exist, before he comes of age anyway. So it's highly unlikely, I think, that the marriage between Philip and Cleopatra was a real serious threat to Alexander's succession to the throne, but I guess it would have niggled away at him. Probably the main issue is the rift that it creates with Olympias, Alexander's very forceful mother. Not only is she, is Olympias and Philip, I guess, essentially emotionally separated, but suddenly there's this huge insult to Olympias of Philip taking a younger bride. And no doubt Alexander, as we know, is very close to his mother. He would quite likely have felt that insult keenly as well. So it's a rift. It does create potential conflict. Although what Philip was doing was not unusual, was actually pretty common, and Philip is the king, he can do what he likes. I don't think it really challenges Alexander's succession to the throne, but, humans are humans, and Alexander's emotions and Olympia's emotions, we know what those two were like. You can imagine it niggling away in the back of their minds. Well, look, things come to a head at the wedding feast of Philip and Cleopatra. Though Alexander was invited, Olympias was not there. She had left Macedonia this time and had gone back to Epirus, to her hometown, I believe. Such was the disintegration in the relationship between her and her husband, Philip. So this wedding feast was kind of like a dual celebration, really, because the invasion of Persia was nearly ready. Philip was all set to go, and we're having this wedding feast to celebrate Philip and to celebrate his marriage, and also, I guess, one last hurrah before we embark on the invasion of Persia. Now, Attalus is important to understanding. Attalus was a general in Philip's army, and he was quite close to Philip. And it was his niece, was Cleopatra. His niece is who was marrying Philip. And so this brings Attalus much closer to the seat of power. He's already quite powerful. He's a powerful general in the Macedonian army, and he's trusted by Philip. But it's really good for Attalus that his niece is marrying the king. And there is a suspicion there that should something happen to Philip, should he die, and should Cleopatra and Philip have had a baby boy before that, and then should that baby boy be seen as the best successor to Philip, then we can't have a baby boy on the throne. We would need what we call a regent, someone to rule in that child's place, and perhaps Attalus is hoping that that will be him. And he would have a good claim to being regent, being the uncle of Cleopatra, and also being close to Philip and being experienced in the ways of the court. If Alexander was out of the picture, I don't know, it's probably stretching a little bit, but we do know that Attalus was pretty stoked that his niece is Philip's new wife, and that brings him much closer to the seat of power. Anyway, the party gets underway, and as we know, a Macedonian party just involves serious drinking. And at one stage during the festivities, Attalus calls a toast. And everyone sort of, hushes up, but, people are pretty drunk. But anyway, Attalus makes a close toast to Philip and to his niece, and then he goes, and to their legitimate heir. This fires up Alexander, who interprets this as a direct insult that he is not a legitimate claim, does not have a legitimate claim to being on the throne of Macedonia because he's only half Macedonian. So Alexander is very angry. He gets up and he shouts at Attalus, what am I, a bastard? Attalus yells insults back at him. Alexander hurls an apple at Attalus, which apparently connected. Attalus threw a cup of wine at Alexander, and then the two sides are going at it, and there's basically a massive brawl at Philip's wedding. Alexander's friends are holding him back, Attalus' compatriots are holding him back, and things are rapidly disintegrating. Philip, very drunk, is obviously a bit disturbed that his wedding is turning into a barnyard brawl, and he staggers up onto the table and shuts everyone up, and then he turns on Alexander. And he gets stuck into Alexander, essentially saying, who are you, boy, to be challenging my marriage, challenging me, challenging Attalus? You will apologize to Attalus at once. Alexander simply refuses. He's not going to apologize to Attalus. he shows disrespect to his father, and he goes to leave the wedding festivities. Philip is enraged. Remember, Philip is drunk, and also remember, Philip is lame. One of his legs is obviously not working particularly well after that injury. And Philip drunkenly draws his sword and lunges from the table at Alexander. But because he's drunk and because he's angry and because he's overbalanced on his leg, he crashes to the floor. And as he's sort of writhing on the floor, Alexander makes a comment along the lines of, "Look at this man, the man who would lead you from Greece to Asia cannot even go from one table to another." So Alexander's always good for a quick quip. Philip is furious. He orders Alexander to leave the party and leave the kingdom and get out of his hair. And so we have this quite emotional scene where things just fall down. Well, Alexander he goes and joins his mother in Epirus, and they're away for maybe 2 to 3 months. We're not quite sure. But in the end, Alexander and Philip are reunited. A mutual friend intercedes and says to Alexander, you need to return to your kingdom, and to Philip, look, you need to have Alexander back. And Philip was extraordinarily fond of Alexander, despite their differences. And Alexander was very fond of his father as well. And so they do reconcile, and Alexander does return to the Macedonian court. However, things also take a turn for the worse shortly afterwards, with something that is called in history the Pixodaris affair. Now, what happened was that we have this area here called Caria, and it had always been friendly to Macedonia. Now, the ruler of Caria was a man named Pixodorus, and in order to cement further ties with Macedonia, he actually offered his daughter as a bride for not Alexander, Philip's other son, Aridaeus. And this would be good for Pixodorus because it would unite him in Macedonia. He knows of the impending invasion, perhaps he's banking on the success of the Macedonians. And it's good for Philip because then he would have a loyal, kinsman area here, which could serve as what we might call a beachhead to establish the Macedonians in Caria in friendly territory before they go to invade the empire proper. So Philip is in favour of this, of marrying his other son, Aridaeus, to the daughter of Pixodaris. Alexander hears about this and he's extraordinarily upset, and he's a very sensitive man. And he's upset because he feels that once again it looks like Philip is trying to cut him out of the succession. And Alexander's friends get in his ear and say, yes, that's exactly what Philip's trying to do. He's trying to cut you out. He's seen Aridaeus as the successor to the throne, which, objectively speaking, is absurd. Aridaeus was known as a half-wit. His half-brother and as a half-wit. He was apparently quite foolish and not quite with it. And so it doesn't seem clear that this was a deliberate attempt by Philip to sideline Alexander. I think we can disregard that. But Alexander, as we know, is impetuous and he's emotional. He sent a message to Pixodaris and he said, hey, look, don't marry your daughter to my idiot brother Aridaeus, marry her to me. Pixodaris was like, oh, this is even a better deal. Not only will my daughter, will I cement ties with Macedonia, I'm going to marry my daughter's going to marry Alexander, the favourite successor to the throne. So Pixodaris agrees, but then word gets back to Philip, and Philip is absolutely furious. Furious at Alexander, furious at Pixodaris. He calls off any marriages whatsoever, and he banishes Alexander from the kingdom, along with some of Alexander's friends. Get out. He orders his friends, he didn't banish Alexander, that was after the wedding feast. He banished Alexander's friends, about 5 of them, he banished them. Kind of like, my son is hanging around with the wrong crowd, so I'm going to get rid of the wrong crowd, and I'm going to keep Alexander quite close to me. So Philip is furious with Alexander again, kicks out some of Alexander's friends. They're banished for at least a year before they can return, getting rid of the wrong crowd my son is hanging around with. And Pixodaris his daughter doesn't get to marry anyone from Macedonia. So there we go. That's where we have the rift between Philip and Alexander, and our next video will be on the murder of Philip. Ka pai.